somehow specifically British, unseen and unknown, and I believe that I have tapped into this reservoir for the Great Migrations. Words are my thing, and it was the words that began it all. I had already written some 50,000 words on Brutus and Albine when Ross suggested that I ought to turn my work into a book. This I have done, and it is dedicated to him. Many of you will know that I am an amateur etymologist. An etymologist, for somebody who doesn't know what etymology is, it's the history of words, it's the genealogy of words, if you like, how they descend through time, altering spelling, but not altering their substance. And I have a specific interest in the connections between seemingly unconnected words. And the deeper I go, the more there is to find. And I know it sounds strange, but at the bottom, always, there is the urge, and I'm speaking of the urge as another word for deity, the urge we know as Poseidon. His original name was Owen, that is one, and the Welsh people who speak Welsh will know that Owen means lamb, and there's another very interesting connection there, which I won't go into now. Oenes, who came ashore at Suma, his other name is Fanax. Urge is in itself a fascinating word connected to orchid, orchard, the Scots name Urchard, and many more. I cannot count the number of occasions when I've been browsing in a British grove of connections, and I've come face to face with Fanax, the one who is both male and female. This, I can only call it an omnipresence, has given me a handle on the ancient religious concepts which underpinned Druidism, once the planet-wide spiritual expression of man, and therefore also Christianity, which is the way out of the roots. This is the tree of life, and we stand on the verge now of the crowning. It's a frightening and exciting time when we will see the death of the bad, restrictive old ways and the emergence of a wholly new way of doing things. This etymological deep-sea diving and making of connections I have dubbed archaeography. I'll give you an example. Take inch and ounce. Not on the face of it a likely pairing, but so they prove to be. Both inch and ounce are from, and I put that in inverted commas because Latin is a much younger language than Welsh, from the Latin uncia, a 12th part, and an inch is a 12th part of a foot. An ounce is a 12th part of a pound. Well, that can't be right. There are 16 ounces in a pound, aren't there? Yes, but only since the Norman conquest. Before then, we used the troy pound, and there are 12 troy ounces in a troy pound. So far, so good. Except that Sparrow, who wrote several editions of a really spanking good Welsh dictionary, which I now know almost by heart, Sparrow gives an old word, inceen for ounce, and modfedd for inch, with two totally different words. So I was initially discouraged, but the Welsh-British language had other plans for me, as it so often has. And I found that mod is an old word for circle, turn, or enclosure. And what kind of enclosed circle turns and has 12 parts? The zodiac. And at the centre of the zodiac is once again the one who is both, the turner himself, Fanax. One is oino in the original language, which has been dubbed Proto-Indo-European. It's a long-winded word for a very ancient language. And it means both one and wine in Greek. And this is what lies behind the Christian sacrament of wine and bread. I deal with this in a forthcoming book called God's Body. It has to do with the chrism, the internal refining process, which will soon be available to every human being. You'll have to forgive my flights into what sounds like esoteric fancy. I simply go where the words take me, and I do the research when I get there. Inch and ounce both derive from this PIE word oino as well. And it is unlikely that modern academia would regard this logical progression as evidence for the existence of higher beings, yet how else can a sensible man or woman regard it who keeps an open mind? I was astounded, as I so often am, when I come to the end of a search and I find that I've come full circle. This type of information reveals itself to the archaeographer in layers, and I've tried to keep most of the more esoteric layers out of the Great Migrations, that they belong better in Finding the Phoenix and God's Body. Phoenix, by the way, Finding the Phoenix is what lies behind, my book that deals with what lies behind Albine, who came to this country 3,500 years ago, and Noah, whose name was not Noah, more of that later. But Finding the Phoenix, Phoenix is the same name as Phalanx, and God's Body is basically about the flow of Earth's energies which are about to be switched on in every human body on the face of this planet. So I envisage these three books. The Great Migrations comes first, and it will come, and then Finding the Phoenix comes after it, and then God's Body comes last of all, because it's the first layer in our story, if you like. And I find over and over again that where modern academia goes wrong is in allying a tightly closed mind to a rampant and uninformed imagination. And we've seen the damage this can do in all three parts of our Britain. Worst of all in Wales, I think, but as Russell was used to say, the Loegrians, the English, have suffered even more because they don't even know who they are any longer. You at least do. Remember who you are. Don't ever lose that knowledge. I'll give you an example of what happens with this way of thinking. In Cambridgeshire recently, a so-called Bronze Age village called Must Farm was found, dating to somewhere around Albine's invasion in 1527 BC. A causeway was found. And despite the fact, I can hardly say this without laughing, despite the fact that in 1527 BC, Rome was 1,000 years in the future, this is described, yes, as a Roman road. It beggars belief that Must Farm's highly trained and presumably rational archaeologists are blind to this glaring anachronism. And we see the same sort of anomaly in the dating of Brutus, commonly held to have arrived in Britain in around 1100 BC. However, his great-great-grandfather, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4 generations back, fled Anatolian Troy in 650 BC, as Wilson and Blackett have established, and yet is confidently, listen to this, because I had to get my head round it, and it's, the dating is confusing. He is confidently stated to have founded Rome 100 years earlier, before he even existed. It's erroneously ascribed to Aeneas, Brutus's grandfather, and I do disentangle it. But even given the conventional date of Rome's founding, this is a complete piece of multi-layered nonsense, which I'm sorry to say even the British historians, such as Enderby and Hollinshead, fall victim to, never mind the Roman historians. How can a man who lived 4 generations before Brutus have founded a city 450 years in the future? I'm happy to say, however, that my revised chronology works beautifully, as you will see as soon as the book comes out. But in the meantime, we must remember that academics' lack of logic clouds not only their own assessment of any given historical era, but it also demonstrates in letters of fire the thinking, if it can be called that lies behind their training. The remains at Must Farm are so extensive and well preserved that the archaeologists were able to say definitively that the slaughter of game was carried out elsewhere than in the main part of the structure. The main part of the structure is the hall, and this is a British dwelling that they're talking about, the place where you entertain your family and friends, where you eat, play music, and recite the history of your nation so that the younger generations learn who they are. You are seriously not going to slaughter the evening's dinner in your sitting room, are you? Yet they were seriously contemplating this unlikely fact. They are so far removed from the humanity and likelihood of the long-gone people whose lives they were sifting through, that this didn't even occur to them. Observing our fellow man through a lens as clouded and fractured as this is necessarily going to lead to an awful lot of tosh. So little as it might appear from the pen of someone, me, who lives on good terms with the turner of the earth, the storm god himself, he's been very good to me and shown me a lot. Logic walks, or should walk, hand in hand with intuition throughout my researches. These two beautiful horses, driven by reason, have taken me safely through swamps and floods of academic interpretation, uphill and down dale, through forests of nonsense and round hairpin bends of twisted thought processes, to something approaching the truth of our antique and royal history. I do not pretend to have everything right, naturally not, but I think what I've achieved is the restoration of an historical fabric so badly rent, darned, patched and remade as to be barely recognisable. However, in the Great Migrations, it is now fit to be consulted as the foundation that it is, and it is the words that have guided me, as well as some virtues which seem to be missing from the modern mind. And the first of these virtues is likelihood. This used to be the guiding light behind any police investigation. For example, it is likely that if a man whose modus operandi is known to the police goes missing under one name, and another man with the same MO turns up a little later under another name, the likelihood is that it's the same man, no? This is exactly what happens when Brutus goes missing, presumed dead from the Roman records, and a mighty warrior turns up at the right time in the British records and becomes sovereign paramount of this country. He is even named as Roman by Nennius, one of our early British historians. To say more here would spoil the lovely surprise I have for you all when the Great Migrations finally comes out, but names even today are of less use in knowing a man or woman than his or her habits and characteristics. Names may change, characteristics remain. As for Albine, 1,000 years before Brutus, the evidence depends wholly on interpreting the records accurately, always bearing likelihood in mind. There is some startlingly precise evidence for her, but most of my research into this period, 3,500 years ago, involved a great deal of deep-sea diving. However, I was spoilt for choice where Albine's migration was concerned, since there were also Hugh Gaddars and Abrahams to consider. As I say in the Great Migrations, the likelihood of there being 3 such total migrations at the same time from the same area is vanishingly small. Therefore, the likelihood is that the 3 migrations must be 1. And they have come to be known for all sorts of reasons, which I also go into, by 3 different names. As regards precise evidence, this isn't as precise as I'd like, but again, the words are a very good indication. Hugh Gaddar's migration is known to have crossed the Severn to Glamorgan, and the Brut, or Chronicle of England, gives another name for the Severn, and it's not the well-known Welsh name of the Habron. That name, believe it or not, is Abraham. And Abraham in the Brut is female. So there we have a clue that joins the 3 migrations, Albines, Hugh Gaddars and Abrahams, in one short sentence. There are traces of Albine all over Britain, surviving in such place names as Loch Shin, Shinner's Bridge, upstream from Totnes, where the Brutus stone is, and the Scots name of MacAlpin, borne by a later dynasty of Scots kings. Even the name of the deity Albine's husband worships survives in the name of a village at the very foot of Troy on the Gog-Magog Hills in Cambridgeshire. And there is a local legend that refers to Albine herself, though not by name. Inevitably, this sort of forensic approach to our records is going to throw light, some of it unwelcome, on them, and we must remember that these records are themselves compilations of much earlier records. Memories get garbled over time, especially if comets keep hitting us and all sorts of other disasters. We're lucky to have the records that we do have. But we shouldn't be afraid of throwing light on them, and nor should we mind dismantling inaccurate statements, however hallowed and long held. It's the truth we're after, so far as possible. And the very word truth comes from the same root as Troy. And we three British nations, Alban, Scotland, Cymru, Wales, and Lloegr, England, are triune, as much a part of each other's identity as the three toes of the Arwen. We are Trojan to the core. We have been grossly abused over the centuries and set at each other's throats by overlords who seem to have cared more for power than for protecting this royal and ancient realm. And that time must end, indeed is ending. We have a job to do, the three of us, and we will do a better job together. I mention my revised chronology. This takes us from what I've done so far, from the man we think of as Noah, to Brutus's grandsons, Belinus and Brennus. It took me years to hack a path through the appalling tangle of dates. In addition, Percy Enderby, who's one of our major historians of the 17th century, uses the Anno Mundi, or Year of the World, dating system, and as if getting to grips with that were not challenge enough, and I'm no mathematician, I then found that he was 300 years out, consistently either one way or the other. But by stitching the chronology to known dates, such as Lud, who was approximately 78 BC, and Brutus is becoming first consul in Rome, which is 509 BC, and by comparing all the dates I could find in Nennius, the Brute, Morgan, Enderby, and other records, such as the periods of oral tradition and chronology, and the genealogy of Iestyn ap Gwrgan, it all began to hang together. Any questions it raised, and there were many, were ultimately answered by the application of logic and common sense, which is not nearly as common as it ought to be. For example, I found myself with a 40-year gap yawning where Albine's invasion should have been, before I realised that, of course, an overland migration, all recorded by Morgan, based on British and other records, would take decades to reach Britain from so. Such an overland migration would necessarily leave pockets of itself behind, groups of people who wanted to settle and wander no more. This, I believe, explains the deep history of peoples on the continent, such as the Saxons, who are so akin to the British, not least in their language. This decades-long migration brought Albine's arrival forward to 1527 BC, which fits perfectly with the descriptions in the periods of oral tradition and chronology, which actually gives a period of 500 years. Coincidence, this is another virtue which modern academia doesn't allow. To quote from the Great Migrations, 4 important things happened in about 650 BC. The Second Trojan War happens. Half the Cymru leave war and famine-ridden Anatolia for Italy, departing from Smyrna, not far from Troy, after a brief stay of about 120 years. The third thing is that an important, dangerous and protective relic, the Ark of the Covenant, goes missing from the biblical records, and an important, dangerous and protective relic turns up in the records in Italy in about the same time. It is next to impossible that these 4 crucial events should be coincidence, therefore they must be connected. But how? Yes, you guessed it, it's all in the book. But I spent quite a lot of time in TGM not believing in coincidence. What I do believe is that the urge, Vanax, Poseidon, God, whatever you want to call him, is speaking not just through me, but all of us. Those who rediscover British buildings, those who decrypt the inscriptions on stones and elsewhere, those who sit on the tail of councils who are wedded to the bird-shredding wind towers and other monstrosities and demand that due process be followed, those who produce BHH-related videos, which I haven't done for a long time, I'm awfully sorry, and those who exert themselves in any way to disinter our true history. We are the voice of the urge of Vanax, and that voice is getting larger and more insistent. Cymru. I use Wilson and Blackett's spelling, it's more phonetic than the modern version. And to those of us whose idea of a good dictionary is one that is at least 300 years old, the modern spelling is less helpful. Have you any idea, you Cymric people, how important you are? I'd like to tell you a little of what I find your name to mean. Since the Cymru underpin and drive almost every British appearance on the world stage, it makes sense that the name or a version of it should appear worldwide as well. Does it? I'll come back to that. I've got a ghastly feeling I'm going over time. Am I all right, Lloyd? Fine? Okay. Yes, the Cymru. Right, if I were ever invited to participate in Desert Island Discs, the book I would choose is Walter Skeat's Etymological Dictionary of the English Language. He gives the root words. I used to be laughed at school for reading a dictionary for fun, but that's just, I'm a nerd, yes, I'm proud of it. He gives the root words that lie behind our subtle English tongue, my subtle English tongue, and it has been shown by Colonel Waddell, among others, that these Proto-Indo-European words, which I've already mentioned, are an early form of English. In this wonderful tome, and I'm coming to Cymru now and the meaning of the name, he gives the root cam or ham. And I paraphrase his description of this. It means to cover over. And it's in Greek it's kamara, a vaulted place. The Gothic is gar hamon, to cover with clothes. Icelandic hamra, a covering. Related words are chamber and chimney. And here are a few more. The Cimmerians, the Crimea, the Gomeridae, who are descendants of the man we called Noah, the Cimbric nation. And Cimbric is the same word as Cymric or Cymric and even Shumeric. Homer. I was thrilled to learn, first from my own ponderings, and then, which were confirmed by Morgan, that the Iliad, so called by Homer, can be translated as the working by the Cymry. There is a Welsh-British word, Iliad, and it means fermentation or working. So the collection of epic poems, known as the Iliad, was sung after the fall of Troy in about 1150 BC and taken by Albine's descendants to Greece some 700 years later, among other places, there to be written down. The Iliad is therefore a snapshot of a dreadful time in British history, albeit with a very small window. There are many, many more variations of your name, but my favourite one is the English word gum. I quote the Great Migrations. This is defined by Skeat as the flesh of the jaws. This word originally meant palate. In Icelandic, it is gomra, and in Lithuanian, it is gomeris. The connection with an arched or vaulted covering could hardly be plainer. The very word palate means vault, and there's a splendid etymological dictionary online called Etym Online, which says it's probably of Etruscan origin. And as most of us here today know, the British and the Etruscans are very closely related. This theme of the vault of a covering persists throughout in many different forms, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is a description of archaeography in action. But what are you covering? The Sumerians or Cymric people called themselves the Watchers. To be watchers, you need eyes. And this is where I wish very much that I had slides to show, because I shall have to wave my arms about to demonstrate what I'm going to say next. By Brutus's time, Albine's three Pacific peaceful tribes had divided naturally into three kingdoms, Alban, Cymru and Loegres. Picture a map of the British Isles to yourself and take Wales back to her original border. Sweep up over what is now Cheshire and across Cumberland, which actually is Cymru land, and Northumberland, or North Cymru land, over to the east coast of what is now England, where the Humber is. Sweep down over Cornwall, the Channel, and Brittany and Normandy, carry on round until you meet the east coast of England again, and you have the iris of an eye, where Loegres is. Alban, Scotland, is the white of the eye, and Loegres is the pupil through which the light goes. Cymru is the senior Pacific tribe, and its job is to protect Loegres. There's a surprise. Yes, I know, forget all about the Plantagenets, they weren't even English. Just as the iris protects the pupil. Too much light, and the iris expands like a shield. Less light, and it contracts. Iris in Welsh is envis, beg your pardon, which also means rainbow, not please in its modern incarnation. Two eyes are a feature of Albine's time. Troy itself still has one of them, Wandlebury Ring, and on the other side of the road, the main road, which was once Troy's main street, there is a faint outline of another ring, the other eye. On the south side of the Wash, at Hunston, at Norfolk, two oak rings were found side by side on the seashore, dating from the right time. There are many, many other examples of these dual eyes. It follows, therefore, that the British eye, Logres, covered by Cymru, with Alban as the white, it follows that it has a counterpart in Sumer, and I shall be following this up in Finding the Phoenix. But one piece of research which confirms the presence of the other eye in Sumer is, funnily enough, to be found slap bang between them at possibly the most famous place in the world, certainly the ancient world, and that is Delphi. Delphi, was founded, it is said, when Zeus loosed two eagles, one from each uttermost end of the earth. And thanks to something Plutarch said, I was able to confirm that Britain was one uttermost end of the world to Delphi, and with the help of the ruler, I went the same length in a straight line to the other direction, and landed, surprise, surprise, on in Sumer, which is where Albine came from. Delphi, including mighty Parnassus, just happens to be in a district called Phocis, and if that sounds like the word focus, you'd be right. Add to that the names of the tribes inhabiting Phocis, which is the Locrians or Ligurians, and a city called Caledon, and we've all heard of Caledonia, famous in ancient times. You begin to see just how widely British influence extended 2,500 and more years ago. Locris is self-evidently the same as Logres. The Welsh Llyrgan is moonlight, while Monday or moon day is dydd llyn. Hope I've got that right. Even though llyn is translated as form, shape, or fashion, I have seen enough of the multi-layered Welsh-British language to know that there is therefore a connection between this and forming or shaping things, between the moon and forming or shaping things. The colours of Logres are black and silver, moon colours. The only possible conclusion is that on a cosmic level, and perhaps even on the physical plane, Logres is where things take shape and are formed. Related words are lux, light, luca or energy, Liguria in Italy, and luck. That is what the Cymric people are guardians of, the energy that permeates all creation. And this must be what lay or still lies in the Ark of the Covenant, and we know where that is. This then is a very little of what lies behind the Great Migrations, and a taster of what to expect from Finding the Phoenix and God's Body.